going on, everybody? You are live with Osiris. Welcome to the Author's Lounge. The world is filled with storytellers, and I, along with my guests, are here today in the Author's Lounge to help educate and inspire the young generation of writers and creators. Now, my guests are professionals in publishing, writers from a wide range of formats, and successful entertainers. They will provide beneficial advice on what to do and what not to do on your path to success. So, without further ado, I'll present to you our next guest. Let's go. Our guest is an award-winning, best-selling author, international speaker, and independent book publisher who is committed to changing the world for the better through inclusive stories and practices. So, without further ado, I present to you Miss Claire E. Jones.
Hello,
What's going on?
hello. Happy to be here.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, again, thank you for just taking a moment to come over here and tune into this show and be a part of this show.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always happy to talk with people. Like, I am really trying to just spread my knowledge far and wide these days because I don't want to be a gatekeeper.
No. You don't want to be one of those gatekeepers, you know what I mean? That just wants to hold on to all of the information. So, you have one heck of a resume. One heck of a resume.
Thank you.
And you've
Thank you.
been around. How long have you been doing this for, professionally?
I mean, professionally, that's a hard question to answer because I've been a public speaker since 2011, but I was first published in 2006, I want to say, something like that.
Okay.
But that was like back in my high school days. Like,
Yeah.
you mentioned the award winning, and we talked a little bit about this before we jumped on live, but I won poetry awards in high school, and so my poetry was published first when I was like 16 years old, was my first like official publication, that kind of stuff. So I don't know if that counts as doing it professionally or not, but I've had this publishing business for about 3 years now.
That's freaking crazy to hear. That starting at the age of 16, this is when you got into it. I didn't get into it professionally anyway until maybe like 5 years ago. And so you got almost 20 years within doing this. Does that sound crazy to you?
It does sound crazy. It's so funny because when I started this publishing business 3 years ago, my mom actually sent me a box of my earliest writing samples. Mm-hmm. And so like I actually wrote a book when I was 7 years old.
Oh, no way. What was it about?
I mean, it's completely rudimentary. Like the dog and the cat went to the park and they had fun, like that kind of stuff. So it's not like, Great Gatsby or anything like that. I wasn't like a child savant. But, I've been writing, I've been exploring the English language since I learned it. I was always a voracious reader, even from a very early age. I was one of those kids that had like an advanced reading level for like, a random fifth grader. I was reading like... Man, I actually got into a fight with my librarian once. I think it was like when I was in 8th grade. I tried to read Anna Karenina.
I don't even know what that is, but that sounds
It's a Dostoevsky Russian literature classic, and it's probably about 800 pages. Like, it's a thick one, and Russian literature in general is really hard to get through. And I was in 8th grade, and my school librarian tried to talk me out of it. She was like, "You can't read this," and I was like, "Well, just because you said I can't, I will."
Oh, now.
And so it took me, I think, 5 months to actually read it, but I did it.
That is impressive. And you were 8?
8th grade.
Oh, 8th grade. Okay, hold on. You were 8 doing that, but
No.
8th grade is still crazy.
No.
Well, what's the age on 8th grade? What is that, 14?
14, 13-ish. Yeah.
Woo. So you knew early that you were a writer, for sure.
I mean, I didn't really take that term for myself, though. Like, I knew I was a creative of some sort. Like, I really attribute a lot of my creativity to my mother. She was an art teacher for 25 years. Yeah. And so I joke that I was born into it, like every bone in my body is a creative bone.
Yeah.
And so I had an art studio in my house growing up, like just a fully stocked art studio. And so I always assumed that I would end up on the visual artist track because that's where my mother went. And no one really pointed out to me that writing was one of my skill sets growing up.
Oh, you tell
Like,
it.
I won these poetry awards, my English papers always did well, my papers in general always did well in school, but I was just a good student overall.
Yeah.
And so no one really pointed it out to me as like that is a skill set to focus yourself around. And so I never really adopted the term writer for myself until I got to college, and I went the art history track. I got my BA in art history. And when you're an art historian, when you're following that career path, they train you to be a lecturist. And so that's why I started public speaking back in 2011 when I was like about 21 years old, is because that's what they encourage you to do. And so I started doing lectures on art historical topics, and I also got published in peer-reviewed journals for like my art historical papers that I wrote for classes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And even then, people weren't like, this is something you should do.
Yeah, for sure.
It was just like, you're just doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
But then once I got out of college, I actually went to a very specific college that was an honors college, and so we had to do an undergraduate thesis in order to graduate. It was our capstone senior project. And so I wrote like a 50-page art historical thesis in order to graduate. And going through that whole process was very rewarding for me. And so once I graduated, I was like, I want to continue writing in some shape or form. And so that's, I think, when it first germinated that writing was something that I wanted to pursue.
Okay. So it sounded like it formed organically over an extended period of time.
Yeah.
But one thing that I really like, and really is credit to your mom, because this is some of the things that I preach when I talk to teenagers. When I would go to some middle schools and I would talk to teenagers, and it's really more so geared to the parents, especially in elementary schools, is that pay close attention to the things that you are attracted to, that you naturally float to, that if you do it naturally and it comes to you so easy, but to others it's far more difficult and comprehensive, that may be a gift that person has. And so it sounds like with your mother, she knew early on that you have something. Let's get you in that direction. It also helped that your mother is an artist, and had an entire art studio in there. So you grew up around that, knowing that to be your norm. And you hear other people who say, what's that crazy phrase? Get a real job, go do something else.
Yes,
that's nothing. That you can't make a living out of being a writer or being an artist. All of that stuff, but you have to be in it to know that it's possible. And people who are on the outskirts of it don't. What are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I mean, I had kind of it coming from both sides. It's like my mother was always like, follow your heart, follow your passion, express yourself. Like when I wanted to dye my hair pink in high school, she was like, go for it.
Go for it.
But on the other hand, like I had divorced parents. And so my dad was much more on the other side of the spectrum of like, be practical, do something that you can earn money at. And like, he actually bribed me to do sports when I was younger. Because I wasn't naturally inclined to do sports and like to go that route and stuff. And so he kind of pushed me to take a broader approach. Like he was always the one that was like, you need a full rounded set of skill sets. And he was like, take physics, take science classes, do sports, do the math stuff. And so like I was kind of good at all of it. But it confused me over the years because I didn't know what to pursue at the end of the day. And like, talking to teenagers, I remember having like the biggest crisis ever in my junior year of high school when they were like, now you get to choose a college. And I was like, what do you mean I get to choose a college? I haven't chosen anything for myself my entire life. I've just done what I've been told to do. And they're like, but follow your heart. Find the one that's the right fit. It's a gut feeling. And I was like, what do you mean it's a gut feeling? I don't know what you're talking about. And so I was really confused heading into the college world because I didn't know what I was supposed to do, what I was good at, because I was kind of good at everything, which didn't really help.
No, that for sure.
I was like, this isn't making sense. But now that I reflect back, now that I'm writing full time and doing this whole publishing full time, I'm actually really grateful for the broad interests that my dad pushed me to, because it also means that I have to do a lot less research when I'm writing fiction.
Yeah.
I do actually know how physics works.
For sure.
I do actually know how historical and political structures work, and like I can build governments, I can build these economic systems really easily within my books because
Yeah.
I have such a broad knowledge base.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I think that that also ended up benefiting me, even though it
Yep.
confused me at the time.
Oh no, I get you on the confusion part. You're at a point in your life where you're like, I don't know which direction to go in, and I don't know if I go in this direction, this is going to work out. But I know I want to do this, but this direction may seem more secure. But I might stagnate in that one, and this one, it's a never ending cycle of thought
Yeah.
processes. And then once you go on the path that you know that we are on in this, especially for you, considering that you do this full time, it's one of those. It's rewarding, but I can imagine it to be a scary thought of what happens. You know, this is my bread and butter. For you though, you know, growing up with such a diverse background in terms of things that you've learned as a storyteller, you can almost use the world
Yeah.
as your library.
Yeah.
You know, create these worlds out of what you've experienced through your life. So now, before I get into you as a writer, I want to actually speak to you as a publisher, right? Because you're an indie publisher as well. So what are some things that you look for as a publisher for people for authors to want to be a part of your company?
Man, most manuscripts that cross my desk, I
Hmm.
actually look first and foremost when it comes to point of view and how they write point of view.
Hmm.
Because that is, I think, the biggest indicator of, how do I say this nicely? Um, Unexperienced writers
Yeah.
is when the POV is confused.
Hmm.
So I think that comes with time, that comes with experience, that comes with writing. But I think it also comes with a whole lot of reading. I think
Yes.
you really, 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 really need to read a lot. Like I'm underlining that and capitalizing that a
Hmm.
lot in order to understand how POV is written well,
Hmm.
because I still see to this day published books, books that end up on library shelves, books that end up on bookstore shelves that have confused POVs.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it is
Agreed.
one of the biggest things that takes me out of the story when I'm reading a book. And
Hmm.
it's interesting. People ask me all the time how I write so well, for lack of a better way to
Yeah.
ask that question. And it really comes down to reading, because I
Hmm.
just have an innate sense, because I've read so much over the years, of
Yes.
how a story flows and how a story develops and how a character develops and how a story is told over
Hmm.
time, that I just have this gut feeling that we were talking about earlier. I just have this intuitive hunch
Yeah.
for where a story should go next or how a story should be told,
Hmm.
because I've read so much over the years.
Yes.
And especially if you read within the genre that you're writing, I think that's
Exactly.
also super
Hmm.
important.
Now I've learned that to be a fact too. I remember hearing Stephen King say, "Hey, if you want to be a great writer, you need to read a lot." But he left it at that, and I
Yeah.
think it needs to be more specific. I do think though, if you read a lot, just what does that actually mean, and how can you differentiate a lot for you versus a lot for somebody else? And in eighth grade, you read an 800-page book in Russian.
Yeah, I'm
You
a
know,
voracious reader.
you know what I mean? Exactly that thought. But to others, is do I need to read that? It's like no. Depending on what your flavor is,
Mm,
depending on how you go about it, it's going to be helpful. You can read an 80-page book, and it can still be just as imperative to your success if you read a 500-page book.
hmm.
Now, I do also agree that reading within your genre is so important because it can help you kind of formulating how to create your own worlds or get ideas on this is how I would do it, or maybe I should go about it this way. Like, for example, if I'm reading any sort of a horror book, since
Mm,
that's one of the genres that I write, and I'll read some horror stories, I kind of get an idea. So, oh, I like that. Man, I would have taken it in this direction, or but I like how they did it. And also to that notion that you mentioned about some of these books that we see in libraries and in bookstores. Even the, and I want the audience to know this, regardless if you are traditionally published or self-published, there are still authors who don't know how to not. I'm trying to say it nicely too.
Yeah.
How to not. They need more experience. Let's just put it that way.
Or a better
Now,
editor.
or a better editor. Yeah,
Really, that's what it is at the end of the day.
yeah,
Do not
yeah,
self-edit.
yeah. No, don't do that. No, find a solid editor.
Yeah.
But to that point, right now, speaking of writing, so you've been doing it for a long time. Your genre. Is there a multitude of genres that you write in, or what's the specific one that you focus on?
I mean, I've almost written in every genre out there at some
Hmm.
point in my life. Like, I started with poetry in high school, and then
Yeah,
I moved on to academic with college when I was doing art history. And then I shifted to business because I have been an entrepreneur for the last 10 years as well. So I've done a ton of business writing. And so that includes nonfiction, legal, business operations, but also like copywriting, like
yeah.
website stuff, newsletters, social media posts. But I didn't really start writing fiction until the last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
But I think it took me a while to let that germinate because I don't think I
Hmm.
would have been able to write the fiction that I write now if I
Yeah.
did it back then. But I have written pretty much in every genre. I think the only genre I haven't written in is memoir, maybe.
Okay.
But I don't know if my poetry counts as memoir or not because it was
I
very
know.
like it was all about my
Yeah.
angsty teenage days. So
Exactly. I've talked when we were in San Francisco, at the conference. I actually, because there were a lot of people there who wrote
oh
memoirs,
yeah.
and I've asked a couple of people, does poetry? Because I do poetry as well. Like, does poetry count as it? Or I guess it depends on the context of it. Is it
Yeah.
fiction? Is it
Yeah.
nonfiction? Is it a memoir? And the answer is actually varied in all three
Yeah.
categories. So it's this. I don't know if there's actually a way to tell, but which one of the genres that you've written in has been? It's a two-part question. Has been the most difficult and the most rewarding?
Ooh. I will answer the rewarding part first because that's
Okay.
definitely the fiction, the fantasy romance that I write because that's where I hit creative flow the
Hmm.
most. And creative flow is the biggest dopamine hit, man. When you're in it,
Yeah,
you're in
tell me
it.
about it.
You
Let's
know, like
go.
you lose
Yes.
weekends. You're like, I don't even know where those 3 days went.
Yeah.
But now I have 30,000 words and I'm happy with it, you know?
Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, yeah. You're like, I forgot I existed.
The world that I created was my actual
Yeah,
world. I
yeah.
don't want to be here right now.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely that's the most rewarding. The most challenging. Oh, that's a hard question. I don't know if I have an answer to that, honestly.
Hey, no
Um,
worries. No worries at all. It'll hit you at a random point. You're like, oh, there it is.
yeah, yeah. I mean, because it depends on my era, honestly. Like, right now, I don't know if I would be able to sit down and write good poetry because I'm not in the poetry mindset, honestly. Like, I have to get myself into that mindset. Like, the nonfiction business stuff that I write nowadays is probably the easiest because I've also just been in the habit of doing it over the years. And so it's really more of like tapping into that mindset for the genre more so than forcing it out.
I see. I think that's a good answer, right? Just because I think the more that you write in, the variety of genres that you write in, the harder that it could be to answer a question like that as well. So speaking of which, so the new writers, like, how many? Because you had a at your table during the conference, there were people who were coming left and right,
Mm.
pitching ideas to you. What are some standout, not people, but what are some standout moments for you when people are pitching you ideas? Like, what is oh, that's what I'm looking for. What are some ingredients there?
You mentioned that there are a lot of memoirs out there nowadays. I get a lot of
Mhm.
memoirists that come to me. And to say it nicely, I try to find the memoirs that are not just really long blog posts.
Yeah.
Because to write a memoir that does well and to taps into the cultural consciousness, you have to connect your personal experiences, your personal story to a broader context.
Hmm.
And So the memoirs that do well these days are the memoirs that tap into a universal feeling, a universal experience, or a niche experience, or a niche, something that another group of people just really truly understands.
Yes.
I think memoirs can come off a little. It's kind of like trauma dumping.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, and I very much encourage you to have a therapist while you go through the process of writing a memoir. I think it's important to have a therapist in general, but especially when writing a memoir. And make sure that the memoir isn't just your therapy process.
Yeah.
If that's how you want to process it, go for it. There's nothing wrong with processing your therapy journey through writing, but to make it a memoir that other people want to read, you have to take a step back from your personal experiences and view it almost as like an omniscient narrator, more so than a personal participant in it. I see a lot of new writers struggle with the omniscient narrator perspective. Because as authors, we are the ultimate omniscient narrator. It is all coming from our own brain, and we do know everything that is happening.
For sure.
So we are the omniscient narrator, and so we often self-insert our omniscient narrator voice into our manuscripts when it shouldn't be there. And so I'm excited by the manuscripts who are aware of that and play with it. Not just like have it be what it is and do the distance and have that distance between you and your manuscript, but to play around with how the narrator relates to the reader. Because you can inject some really funny, humorous asides. Like I always think of Jane Austen. That's one of the examples that I use when it comes to omniscient narrators, because Jane Austen is so good at having those like snarky asides about what the characters are doing. And it's not like the characters are having the snarky asides. It's the omniscient narrator who's having the snarky asides. Like the ending of Mansfield Park in particular, if you haven't read it, go read it. And it's like, it is so snarky, but it wraps up the story in such a beautiful way. And it's like, it could have been different, but it wasn't, is basically like how she wraps up the story. And that's how you do omniscient narrator well.
Now, I like, you're giving golden advice. I definitely could have probably used the therapist portion when I wrote my poetry book. That second one was... And it's weird because I was in mental health for about 10 years and within the military, and I worked with these. I was a paraprofessional, and then I was a substance abuse counselor within the Air Force, right? And that wasn't even a thought that I had in my mind on, I should probably talk to somebody after the stuff that I wrote there. It was, you're right, it's trauma dumping.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. But when it comes to writing, because you write fiction and nonfiction, you know, so. When it comes to fiction work, are you a plotter? Well, let me tell people who don't know what it means between plotting and being a plotter and a pantser. Pretty much, if you're a plotter, you like to outline. If you're a pantser, you pretty much don't outline, or you might have a basic idea and you just go. So, I know you know what that meant, but just for those who don't know.
Yeah.
But which one of those are you?
I'm actually right in the middle. I call myself a plantser.
A plantser, yeah. I'm gonna steal that one.
Yeah. Because I do outline to some extent, but it's not like a fully fleshed out outline. In order to create my fictional stories, I have to envision it as a movie in my head first. And so I create a playlist. I actually have a playlist for each book that I write, and the playlist has about 5 to 6 songs that hit the 5 to 6 major emotional arcs for the characters within the book. And so with help from that playlist, I spend a lot of time lying on my floor with my earbuds in, listening to the playlist, and just imagine how the story unfolds. Because I have an idea of where I want it to begin, and I have an idea of where I want it to end. And so I spend maybe about 1 to 2 months before I even start writing, envisioning how that arc happens between point A to point B. And so I might make myself a few little notes here and there. I have like a notebook where I have all my book ideas, where I keep all of my character notes and stuff like that.
Hmm.
I might have like quotes that I attribute to various characters that are like character inspiration, or I might have like characters that exist elsewhere that are character inspiration from like other forms of media. And so I'll make those notes, and I'll mention the big plot hits, like they go here, they do this, they go here, they do this, but it's not like it's completely mapped out.
Yeah.
So once I start writing, I actually can't jump around in my manuscript. I have to
Hmm.
write as it comes,
Yep.
because I don't know how they're going to get from point A to point B
Love
exactly,
that. Yeah. Uh-huh.
but they will show me that. And sometimes they say stuff that completely surprises me, and I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, I guess we're going in that direction
Yep.
then.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so it's a mix of both, honestly. Like, they
Yeah.
definitely surprise me as I write. Like, I can't write chapters out of order. That's not something I can
Me.
do.
I'm with you on that.
But yeah, I have to go page by page,
Hmm.
sentence by sentence.
Yes, and and for those who are kind of stuck on they don't know which one, just go with the flow and see what happens. But I myself have learned that just kind of writing even with an idea of the story and just see where the story takes you. I remember I never knew what that phrase meant when I started out doing this was, hey, see where the story takes you. I'm like, what does that even mean? But my God, you had mentioned the greatest dopamine hit right early on in this. I don't think there's a better feeling when you are just in that flow state and you are gone, especially if you don't know where the story is going and you're writing it. It's just or typing it, however someone writes it, and they and everything is just coming to them, and all of a sudden the hero is dead, and you didn't even realize that the hero was going to get killed off, and now it's the sub character who actually turns out to be the hero. Do you have an issue with killing off your heroes without giving spoiler alerts for your stories if you kill off your heroes?
No, I do not have an issue with it.
Yeah.
um, it's funny, like, I'm laughing as you're talking about that because my current book that I'm writing is very angry. And I didn't, like, I knew going into it that it was going to be a very angry character, but, like, there are dark parts that are coming out of me in
Yeah.
this. And
Yeah.
this is the first book that I've written where I've come to a scene that I knew was coming. Like, I knew this death scene was coming.
Mhm.
And I got to the paragraph and I was like, I don't want to write it because it's so, like, it's so painful. I was like,
Uh,
I was like, but
uh-huh.
I know it's coming and I don't want to write it because it's going to
Yeah.
be so
That's
painful.
awesome. I think this is sensational, right? Because as a reader, they don't know the process that we do if they're not a writer themselves. So they
Mhm.
read the work, and we hope that they can just see the message that we were trying to convey. But as the writer and you're creating it, a lot of what's captured in the story doesn't actually make it to the story itself.
Mm.
There's so many elements to it, or through the revisions or whatever the case may be, that you're like, oh, okay, that stays where that goes, or however it happens. But have you actually ever like cried with your
Oh, yeah,
story? Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I wasn't trying to kill you, man. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, like I knew they were going to die. I had planned on them dying. That was part of the plot to them to die. And
Yeah.
then I got to the scene and I was like, don't make me do it. I don't want to do it.
Don't make me do it
I was like, but no, but do I have to? And I'm like, yes, you do
to you.
have to, Claire.
You're gone. Do you revive any of your characters, or is it once they're gone, they're gone?
You froze there, so can you
Oh, I
repeat the
think.
question?
No, sorry. Okay, the camera just logged on me. No, I was saying, do you have any issues when you're hold on, wait. Okay, there we go. When it comes to your characters, do you have any issues like do you bring your characters back in any way? Do you revive them, or is it once they're gone, they're freaking gone?
I mean, it depends on the magic mechanics
I see.
ultimately. Like
Yeah, yeah.
that's what I love about fantasy too is that you can play around with those kinds of mechanics. A lot of my magic mechanics are actually inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. I'm a huge Dungeons and Dragons
Oh,
fan.
yeah. Hmm.
And so I do like that ability to revive people and bring people back to life, but I like to have limitations around it. I don't
Yeah.
like having like, and then they come back to life, and then
Like, yeah.
So My magic classes, I do actually have one of my classes is Blessing of Life. And
Hmm.
so they do have life-giving healing abilities, but
Yeah.
they are the only person that can do it, and they have limitations to that power.
Hmm. Now,
And so when it's applicable, yes.
yeah. How do you write? So this is just my fascination, right? Because I mean, I'm sure I could learn it if I decided to, but like naturally, that's not something that I'm skilled at. How in the world, given your experience, right? How in the world do you even create how do you even write a fantasy world? I'm so picture based
Mm,
that I have to throw pictures into my books just for it to
mm.
help it make sense. But how do you write a whole world for it to then stick with the reader?
I learned world building from a dungeon master. His
Mm.
name is Matthew Mercer. He runs Critical Role. I don't know if you know anything about the world of Dungeons and Dragons, but
Oh,
he
I do.
does
Yeah, yeah.
Critical Role, which is a Twitch stream that's been going for 10 years at this
Hmm.
point. And I've just listened to a lot of his interviews over the years, and he's just given a lot of advice on how to build as a DM running a
Yeah.
game. And so I literally just took his advice. One of his advice, the fundamental advice piece that he gives out is that you just start with one town and you
Hmm.
figure out how that town runs, how that town functions, how that town, like the political, the economic, the cultural, the social,
Hmm.
just how that one town runs. And then you slowly build out from there. And
Yeah.
so I started with an island. That's where I started in
Yeah.
my world. I had an island and it was a self-contained island and I figured out how that island ran and then I built a world around that
That's crazy
island.
cool.
So like,
Yeah.
and then I was like one of his questions that he always asks is where does magic come from?
Hmm.
In a fantasy world it does have to stem from something. There has to be some sort of like logistical production or generation of magic from like where it comes from.
Hmm.
And I had been reading a series at the time called Dark Shores by Danielle L. Jensen, and
Hmm.
she had this concept where magic was kind of coalesced around certain geographical locations.
Okay.
And I liked that idea. And so these geographical locations were like spaced evenly throughout the globe,
Hmm.
and they were like basically hotspots for
Okay.
magic. And so I liked that. And so I stole that idea and I was like,
Yeah.
let's have a globe where there's like hot spots for magic. And so
Hmm.
I just drew out a globe and I was like, okay, so they're along the equator and these are the different things. And I also like elemental magic. So I was like, let's do elemental classes.
Yeah.
And then from there, I birthed the Pantheon, which
Hmm.
is the source of the magic. So then there were gods and goddesses related to each of the elemental
Hmm.
magic classes. And from there, it just kind of built on itself.
I love that. That is especially the reference to Dungeons and Dragons and just drawing inspiration from your love of Dungeons and Dragons. Easter eggs. Are you a fan of that? And like that island that you mentioned, right? It's where it all started. Does that island make appearances in
Yeah, book
different
one
iterations
is
of your book?
exclusively on that island.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll ask you a couple more questions and then I'll go ahead and let you get out of here. So, one of the last things I want to ask is what is some advice that you can give not only to newer writers, but to writers in general?
I mean, therapist is definitely
Yeah.
one of my
Get a therapist.
first advice. Like, I've been in business for so long, and when people ask me, like, the advice that I give to new business owners as well is get a therapist. And I think that's especially true for writers because we face rejection day in and day out. Like, we are going to be rejected in some shape or form pretty much on a daily basis, if not multiple times a day. And being able to cope with that in healthy ways is very key.
Hmm.
Read a lot, which is definitely something we've already talked about as
Yes.
well. And don't be afraid to have like a sketchbook. Not necessarily like drawing sketchbook, but writing sketchbook. I think writers tend to overemphasize like each word and sentence needs to be perfect. It needs to be like like word salad is the first step to anything, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so don't be afraid to have a sketchbook or a notebook or a Word document or a folder somewhere where it just is nonsense. It doesn't make sense. Just scribble it out. Whether it turns into something or not isn't the point. It's just
Mhm.
we are exercising those muscles.
Okay. Wow, that's solid advice for sure. And so I know I said I had two more questions, but one came actually as you were speaking that I forgot to ask at the beginning, which was the publishing choice. You're an indie publisher, right? You house your own work. You have complete control. Why not? Why? I don't know if you did or not. Maybe you did, like traditional publish
Hmm.
to the traditional publishing. Was that a route that you took? And if so, why did you go back to the world as an indie publisher?
I tried to do trad pub back in 2013,
Hmm.
and I just had a very bad experience with it.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily the agent that I was talking to that gave me the bad experience, but it was honestly the author who introduced me to her agent that gave me
Yeah.
the bad experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
I won't get into the details,
Yeah.
but
For sure.
it was just a discouraging environment and discouraging process to go
I see
through.
it.
When I was thinking about starting my own publishing about 3 years ago, I spoke to a lot of book coaches and author coaches just to get
Hmm.
a new view on the landscape because I knew so much had changed between then and now. Because that was back in 2021, 2022. So that was like
Yep.
10 years of difference between the two experiences.
Yeah.
And so I knew a lot had changed. And I honestly just don't have the patience for the trad pub cycle. It takes too long.
Yeah. Yes.
And because I have such a strong experience in business now, there was no really benefit to me going with TradPub because I knew I could do all the things that TradPub provides for authors myself.
Yeah.
Like I know team
Mhm.
management, I know how to hire people, I know how to project manage, I know how to do all of those things really well. And so there weren't really any benefits for me at the end of the day to go with
Yeah.
TradPub.
For sure, and I think what's what is exceptional in terms of your skill set is the business side,
Yeah.
and many people in this business, especially for the newer writers, don't focus on the business side
Yeah.
of book publishing. This is it's such a vast difference in terms of being a writer versus being a marketer or someone who has to be responsible for that book, especially if you're going about it yourself. And
Mhm.
that's one of the things that I learned as well. That when I was starting out, I'm like, okay, cool, I got this book. I know it's material. I know it's solid. Like every author feels their work is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And I hope I hope that's the case. I hope most authors believe in themselves that you got to read my material. But the business side of it is a completely different animal if you have no experience in that, especially if you have zero experience with business. So I agree with you.
Yeah.
And you knowing how to do it, it does offset the need of wanting to even go to try
Yeah, this
publishing.
is what I tell people when we talk about this is that I wrote, published, and sold my debut novel in 9 months.
Hmm.
But I was able to do so because I have the extensive background in creativity. I've been doing it for most of my life, so I could create a high quality creative product. And I also have the extensive background in business, so I could sell and produce the high
Yes.
quality creative product. And you need both. Like, even if you are going the trad pub route, because you need to still do your own marketing, they're not going to
Hmm.
do the marketing for you.
Right.
And so, as an author, you're either going to have to either spend the time or the money learning the skill sets you don't know.
Absolutely.
And so either you hire the people to do the things for you or you spend the time learning the things. And that's often a longer process. So
Yes.
you're investing something at the end of the
Yes,
day.
and that's right there. Is it the spending cost of you're doing on your own? People, I think, would benefit greatly from the thought process of it being an investment in themselves
Absolutely.
versus I'm just spending. Oh, this is a lot of money. I'm like, maybe, but like, how bad do you want it? You get what you pay for, and it's not going to be any better for you if you go on the other side. It's not
Yeah.
the grass isn't always greener,
Yeah.
and the wait time is much longer. So unless you're a celebrity or you're some sort of an A-list influencer, you're probably going to be stuck doing it on your own. And I think that's for the better because you at least have control of the marketing, you know how to do it, and you have those ideas. So, last question for you, and I'll let you go, Claire. So, where can people find you?
I'm on most major platforms these days. Claire Joyance is my tag, so ClairJoyance. You can also find me at claireejones.com, but most platforms have me on it at some shape or form.
Yeah, yeah, and don't worry, I'll link that, especially because I know you have a LinkedIn as well. So I'll link your website itself, and then also your LinkedIn underneath it on this, and also this will be available on Amazon. I'm also going to have this available in audio across, was this man? There's a lot of different platforms.
Yeah.
Spotify. Hold on, wait, let me see if I can try to remember. Spotify, Pandora, Apple, and others. Just read the description to those.
TC.
Yes. Well, hey, thank you so much. Is there any last remarks you want to make before we close this out?
No, it's just very interesting that I've been having a lot of conversations with teenagers lately about their writing process. And so I'm happy to inspire and give my knowledge to the next generation. I love you guys and I believe in you guys.
Yes, yes, indeed. I ditto that thought. So, hey, thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to tune into today's episode with the fabulous best-selling author Claire E. Jones. It was wonderful meeting you at the conference in San Francisco, and I'm glad we live close by. Definitely got to introduce you to my wife and my family. I'm going to make my way over to Seattle at some point, and I got to introduce you to another buddy of mine. And yeah, let's continue to stay in touch.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to tune into today's episode. You're live with Osiris, and I will catch you next time. Take care.